Right now, somewhere, a mother is wrapping her newborn in a soft blanket, setting the thermostat to 70 degrees, and closing the door gently behind her. She doesn't think about it. She doesn't have to. But 20,000 years ago, that same act of keeping a baby alive through the night was one of the hardest problems your ancestors ever solved. The world outside was locked in ice. Temperatures could fall to -40. And somehow, against odds that should have erased your entire bloodline, newborn humans survived. How? You need to understand something first. A human newborn is, biologically speaking, a disaster waiting to happen. Unlike a baby deer that stands within minutes, or a baby whale that can already swim, a human infant is born almost helpless. It cannot regulate its own body temperature. It cannot generate significant heat through shivering. Its skin is thin. Its fat reserves are small. And its surface area is large relative to its size, which means heat escapes fast. Drop that infant into an ice age night, and it would die of hypothermia within hours. So why didn't it? The first answer is fire. But not in the way you'd expect. Fire alone couldn't save a baby. A fire keeps a room warm. But a newborn loses heat faster than adults do. And a few feet from the flames, the cold still bites. What actually kept infants alive was something far more intimate. Skin-to-skin contact. Constant, near-continuous physical touch between mother and child. Anthropologist Wenda Trevathan, who studies the evolutionary biology of childbirth, has argued that human infants evolved to expect almost uninterrupted contact with a caregiver's body in the earliest months of life. That contact wasn't a bonding ritual. It was thermoregulation. A mother's body ran at a stable 98.6 degrees. Her chest became a portable furnace. And her newborn, tucked against it day and night, borrowed her warmth to survive. Here's where it gets stranger. Human babies are born with something called brown adipose tissue, or brown fat. Unlike the white fat that stores energy, brown fat exists for one purpose only. It burns calories to produce heat, directly, without shivering. Researchers studying infant thermoregulation have found that this tissue is concentrated around the neck, shoulders, and spine of newborns. Almost like a built-in heating vest. It is one of the clearest signs that the human infant body was shaped, over hundreds of thousands of years, by cold. Your ancestors weren't lucky. Their babies were engineered by natural selection for exactly this crisis. But brown fat alone wasn't enough. It could buy time. It couldn't win the war. So your ancestors built the rest of the solution using their hands. Consider the eyed needle. In 2016, archaeologist and anthropologist James Adavajo, along with colleagues studying Ice Age technology, pointed to a discovery that quietly rewrote what we know about the period. Bone needles with tiny drilled eyes, dating back over 40,000 years. Found scattered across Ice Age Europe and Siberia. These weren't decorative. They were the difference between exposure and survival. Before the eyed needle, clothing was essentially draped animal hide, loose and full of gaps where wind could cut through. The eyed needle allowed for tailored, fitted garments. Tight sleeves. Sealed seams. Layered furs sewn directly to the body's shape. For an adult, tailored clothing meant survival. For an infant, it meant something even more specific, a custom-sewn cocoon of fur. Small enough to trap body heat against a tiny frame. Portable enough to be carried while a mother worked, gathered, or moved camp. Think about what that actually required. Somebody had to conceive of the idea. Somebody had to measure a body that couldn't yet speak. Somebody had to sew, by firelight, in the middle of a frozen world. A piece of clothing built for someone who had been alive for only a few weeks. That is not a footnote in human history. That is one of the earliest expressions of parental love turned into engineering. Now here's the twist you didn't expect. Keeping a baby alive in the Ice Age was never a solo project. It was never just a mother, alone in a cave, fighting the cold by herself. Anthropologist Sarah Blaffer HRDY has spent decades building a case that human child-rearing evolved around a system she calls alloparenting. Shared caregiving among multiple adults and even older children within a group. Her research suggests that human infants, unlike almost every other great ape, were raised by networks, not individuals. Grandmothers held them. Aunts nursed them if a mother's milk ran low. Older siblings carried them. Even unrelated group members took turns keeping a baby warm through the night. In an Ice Age band, a fussing infant might pass through 4 or 5 different sets of arms before dawn. Each one a fresh source of body heat. Each one buying the child another hour. Why does that matter so much? Because a single caregiver gets tired. A single caregiver has to sleep, has to hunt, has to eat. But a network never fully powers down. There was always somebody awake. Always somebody warm. Always somebody willing to press a freezing infant against their chest. In the dead of a February night 40,000 years ago. This is, some researchers argue, one of the deepest roots of human cooperation itself. The Ice Age didn't just threaten individual survival. It was selected for groups that shared the burden of keeping the most vulnerable alive. And the evidence isn't only theoretical. At the Sungur site in Russia, archaeologists uncovered the burial of 2 children, dated to roughly 34,000 years ago, covered in thousands of painstakingly carved ivory beads, alongside spears made from mammoth tusks, straightened using techniques that would have taken hundreds of hours to master. Some researchers who study the site have suggested this level of care and resource investment reflects just how highly children were valued in Ice Age communities, worth an almost unthinkable amount of collective labor, even in death. If a community would spend that much effort honoring a child who had already died, imagine the effort spent keeping one alive. Still, effort wasn't always enough. This is the part that's hard to sit with. Infant mortality during the Ice Age was brutally high. Some estimates drawn from skeletal and demographic research suggest that a significant percentage of children didn't survive their first year. And cold exposure was one of the leading killers, alongside disease and malnutrition. Every technique you've just heard about. The skin contact. The brown fat. The tailored furs. The shared caregiving existed because the alternative was so often death. These weren't quaint traditions. They were survival technology, refined generation after generation by the brutal feedback loop of who lived and who didn't. There's something else worth noticing here. Anthropologist Melvin Connor, who has studied childhood across hunter-gatherer societies for decades, has pointed out that many of these ancient caregiving patterns, constant physical contact, on-demand nursing, multiple caregivers, communal sleeping, still show up in the small number of hunter-gatherer societies that survive today. These aren't randomly invented customs. They are echoes of solutions that were tested against the harshest possible conditions and passed down because they worked. Every time you've heard that a baby just needs to be held, you're hearing the faint signal of an Ice Age survival strategy still running quietly in the background of modern parenting advice. So think again about that thermostat, that perfectly heated nursery, that blanket built for one. It feels ordinary, even automatic. But it is standing on top of hundreds of thousands of years of desperate innovation. It is standing on top of brown fat evolved specifically to fight the cold. On top of a needle small enough to sew a custom coat for a creature that couldn't yet lift its own head. On top of a chain of arms, passing a crying infant from body to body. Through a frozen night, none of them willing to let the fire in that tiny chest go out. Your ancestors didn't have central heating. They didn't have thermometers or synthetic insulation. Or heart rate monitors. What they had was each other, and a fierce, almost engineered refusal to let the cold win. And it worked well enough, generation after generation. Frozen night after frozen night, that you exist right now to hear about it. So the next time you tuck a blanket around someone you love, or wrap your arms around a person who's cold, remember what that gesture used to cost and what it used to mean. It wasn't sentiment. It was survival. And somewhere in your body, in the way an infant still calms the instant it's held against a warm chest, that Ice Age is still quietly alive.